All right, all right. Welcome everybody, and thanks again for joining us for another round of the Fit Nation Lunch and Learn. Today we are joined by an awesome guest, Dr. Ludidi. Thank you so much for joining us today and spending the time in order to educate us on one of the biggest topics that I think is happening right now in diet across the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me here, guys. I'm looking forward to this 60 minutes of conversation, nutrition talks, food talks, entrepreneurship, intermittent fasting, and more. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And for those of you guys who are joining, this is quite a treat because Dr. Ludidi is the man who wrote the book on intermittent fasting, which he's going to be able to talk about and share a bit today. We've there we go. We have it right there. Awesome. And so is there was a lot of questions that came through when we were looking at what was submitted from the registrants today. So in addition to making sure that we're going to go through and have a chance in order to address all of those questions, we also spoke with Dr. Ludidi and he volunteered to also raffle off 5 books as well to the people who have submitted questions. But with that being said, we know that if you guys we don't want to keep other people who haven't had a chance to submit questions yet out of this. So as we're going throughout the presentation today, go ahead and submit a question on any pieces that you're interested, or submit why you think you're a eligible great eligible person in order to be able to receive the book, and then you'll automatically be entered in the raffle to be able to receive this. So thank you so much, Dr. Ludidi, for making that available to the audience members today. I'm sure they're gonna appreciate that. If you want to throw in a 6th or a 7th book for Derek and myself, go. We won't be mad at that either.
We'll arrange that. Don't worry about that.
I'm even willing to share.
Awesome. So for those of you guys who don't know Dr. Ludidi, Dr. Ludidi, would you mind spending a little bit of a background about yourself, the book, and then we can jump into some of the general questions that we had from the audience on the basics of intermittent fasting.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to keep it short, but so in general, my background is that I am a nutrition scientist, movement scientist. I got my bachelor's in human movement sciences and a master's in nutrition sciences. And eventually, I did my PhD in the field of the irritable bowel syndrome, in the field of gastroenterology. So I got to work with a lot of patients also during my PhD time. And somewhere in 2011, I think, I decided to leave. No, wasn't yet in 2011. I got to work with clients since 2011. So people ask me, a lot of a lot about nutrition, a lot about movement. Can you help me living a healthier lifestyle, become fitter on the soccer pitch, and so forth and so forth, become stronger, leaner. I started very small, and things grew quite fast. I left the academic world in 2014 to live my life as a translator from science to everyday practice. So that's what I do. I translate scientific evidence, scientific stuff, um, pull that out of the ivory towers and share it with the average person. Decided to write a book. Last year, I wrote my Dutch version of the Dr. Ludidi method of intermittent fasting. Became a bestseller. And during Corona, we took the crisis as an opportunity to translate it into English. And yeah, the rest is history. So we're now also available in English in the US via Amazon, Takealot in South Africa, Canada, UK, you name it, we're there. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and maybe we can start with the basic one. I'll say that this one is mine. There's a lot of talk about intermittent fasting, but I personally don't know any of the science behind it. How it's actually what it looks like, what it does regarding digestion, metabolism, hormones, and how it's good for you. Can you explain a little bit about the basics for those who don't know?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is a very interesting thing, and it will answer a lot of questions already in the beginning. I'm quite sure about that. So when talking about intermittent fasting, and obviously I'll also explain this to the listeners who can't see what I'm talking about here. But when talking about intermittent fasting, what you basically do is you don't eat for quite a while. We're talking about the fasted state when you haven't eaten, when you haven't ingested any calories for 12 hours or longer. When going a little bit further, when we're talking about intermittent fasting, which actually means that you fast for a while and then you eat again, and then you fast again, and then you eat again, and so forth. So with intervals, um, we actually take at least 14 to 16 hours of fasting to be considered as significant to induce bodily effects. Now, what are the effects? What happens when you start fasting for longer than 12, actually longer than 14 hours? To start with, your fat burning capacity will increase. During the initial fast, you will deplete your glycogen that is stored in the muscles and in the liver. Glycogen is sugar that's been stored in the muscles and in the liver, a reserve fuel source, as it were. You will deplete during prolonged fasting, 14, 16 hours, you will deplete glycogen, which means that you are in a relative energy shortage. Now, what happens? Your body has perfect mechanisms to compensate for that, and it will upregulate the metabolism of fat. Your body will boost its fat burning capacity to compensate for the relative shortage from sugar. In the West, we typically use sugar as a fuel source. And the transition into using fat as a source of fuel, that transition that can be a little bit difficult in the initial stage for the first, let's say, 1 up to 2 weeks. That can be a little bit hard um, because the body isn't used to utilizing fat as a fuel source. But after that, your fat burning capacity will be elevated. You will use predominantly fats and also ketones as a fuel source to start with. Why would you want to use fat as a fuel source? Well, when fat burning increases, that means that your body fat percentage drops, and that's beneficial for most of us. Most of us have plenty of fats stored subcutaneously. So increasing the body's fat burning capacity reduces your body's fat percentage, which benefits health, which benefits sports performance in a way that it makes you less dependent on external energy, on food, on carbohydrates during performance. And this might come in as a little bit as a shock, because most of us are used to eating a banana before they go for a run, before they go to the gym. They drink a sports drink, high sugar sports drink whatsoever, that will provide them with sufficient carbohydrates to perform the exercise. Whilst during fasting, obviously you can't eat, and secondly, you don't have any endogenous sugars stored to provide you with that fast energy, as we've always seen it, the sugars as fast energy. However, once you've gone through the initial stage, the stage of metabolic adaptation, the stage in which your body becomes a fat burning machine, as it were, once you have overcome the initial 2 weeks, your body will release fats and ketones as well, as a compensatory mechanism to deliver the fast energy. Then you can perform at the pitch, on the road, running, whatsoever, with less and less and less exogenous energy, with less food, with less sugars. So fat burning capacity will increase. You will drop body fats. You will lose weight. You will become less dependent on food during exercise. And I've tested this repeatedly in endurance athletes, for instance, Ironman athletes, but also in very explosive athletes. I've worked with a former heavyweight champion in kickboxing, Badr Hari, and I'll also explain about his case in my book, who is a very explosive fighter who also benefited from intermittent fasting during his preparation stage in the absence of sugars. Continuing, when fat burning capacity increases, the risk of developing modern welfare diseases like diabetes type 2, cardiovascular disease, obesity already mentioned, that risk will also decrease, especially when you implement intermittent fasting as a recurring reset, maybe twice or 3 times per year. When I take it even further, it will benefit your body cells' lifespan. Proliferation of cells, which means their division will be slowed down. Cells will start recycling waste products, which increases their lifespan, which we call autophagy. And in this way, it's been proposed that fasting eventually slows down aging, because your cells will live longer, which means that they don't have to, proliferate that often, which means that you slow down aging. Doesn't mean that you become 120 years without any problems, but on a molecular level, on a cellular level, it does slow down aging, which is also beneficial for the development of, for instance, Alzheimer, and they're testing this right now in different laboratory settings with cells, with test animals, mice, rats, and also with humans. And finally, fasting benefits your brain function. Your cognitive function improves as a result of fasting. And all these mechanisms that I just talked about, they have a evolutionary background, a biological evolutionary background, because when we were still living as hunter-gatherers, even though we could prepare, let's say, the next meal to start the day with, I mean, our brain capacity hasn't changed in over the past 100,000 years. So we were very well capable of putting some food aside for the day after to start with, our breakfast. But we were also very well capable of going without food for prolonged times. And I dare to say that fasting has made us humans who we are to date. Along with fire, fasting, the capability of going without food for a prolonged period of time has made us humans who we are. Because during food scarcity, we would, we kept at side for maybe 1 or 2 weeks, but thereafter we had to find new solutions to cope with food scarcity. And what we would typically do is to move over to another place with richer soils to get our foods from. And that required a certain amount of cognitive creativity and also plasticity. And what we see in a laboratory setting is that people who are in the fasted state and who have to fulfill certain cognitive tasks, like a math task, for instance, they perform better than lazy people who are in the fat state. Mice who are in the fasted state, they can solve a problem, for instance, finding their way through a maze in a shorter time than fat mice. So over time, this fasting has co-evaluated with humans, and we all possess the capacity to fast longer than 12, 14, even 24 hours. We will not die. We are a little bit afraid of the sensation of hunger nowadays, but I can promise you, you will not die. Men, women, elderly, babies, pregnant women, over evolution, they have all coped with famine and food scarcity, and they survived because of these bioevolutionary mechanisms, because of they were capable of, enabling the metabolic switch to switch from glycogen, sugar, as a predominant fuel source to fat as a predominant fuel source. Now, I'm not saying that pregnant women should fast, for instance. We'll get back to that later. But from a biological point of view, from a bioevolutionary point of view, we do have the capacity. And in this modern time in which food is abundantly available 24 hours per day, in which we don't encounter food scarcity anymore, famine anymore, fasting could be that means to get you back to a healthy situation. Whereas back in the days, tens of thousands years ago, food scarcity would pop up here in Europe, we say every 7 years. We have, we have good years, and every 7 years we have bad years. But food scarcity over a lifelong period would pop up 3 to 4 times. And however, that doesn't happen anymore. And in that case, fasting could be a means that puts you back to where you need to be, to give you that reset that is needed to help you to live a longer, healthier, and obviously eventually also a healthier life. I think that's it for now, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing such a great overview, and I think that is perfect for as a way in order to be able to kick off the conversation. Piggybacking off of the description that you were giving, it sounds like intermittent fasting is something that has a lot of benefits and is something that has the potential for a whole broad range of people and audiences. One of the questions that came through was about who would be kind of the ideal person in order to be able to participate within intermittent fasting, and then kind of the opposite side of that, is there or are there people or groups of people that maybe shouldn't consider intermittent fasting because they're maybe at risk?
And if I
Mm-hmm.
may, add on to that, well, there's also this set of people who, it's interesting you brought up about fear, because there's this group of people through the questions I saw that have this fear of losing muscle as well as kind of deteriorating their bodies in other ways.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, already touched slightly on the answers. The ideal person to fast, let me just go back a little bit, because before you start fasting, you should always ask yourself, what is it actually that I want to achieve? Why would I even start fasting? Mind you that during normal circumstances, and also if you look at people living in nature, Khoisan, for instance, the Nenets in Russia and Siberia, they are people who still live according to the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. And in nature, people eat 3 meals per day: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's the normal condition. So to start with, and I also described this in my book, no one should fast. You should not fast. I mean, it's not necessary to fast. But if you want to fix a certain issue, then fasting could come in as a potential solution. Obesity, cardiovascular disease, diabetes type 2, your fitness journey, leaning up while maintaining muscle mass. This is a very interesting topic as well. But also for general health reasons, as I also said, that it helps you in preventing certain disease. It helps you in maintaining a certain body shape that is beneficial for health. It helps you maintaining a certain cognitive shape that is beneficial for health. Eating 3 meals per day, eating modestly 3 meals per day while being physically active, that's the normal configuration. But having a very sedentary lifestyle in which, the most that we do throughout the day is this is our physical activity pattern nowadays. uh, with at the same time, overeating, that requires an intervention, and then fasting could be a solution. So I'd say people who try to lose weight, which is a very superficial, goal in my opinion, but those people could be eligible for intermittent fasting. People who want to live a healthy and long life, healthy aging, longevity, that's absolutely a group of people who could benefit from repeatedly recurring intermittent fasting. Athletes who want to improve their sports performance, who struggle with, for instance, when going into competition, football, for instance, have I eaten too much or too little? How will my stomach react to the food that I just ate? I ate an hour before competition. Um, will I get tired or will I get stomach cramps or will I, is it enough? Because after an hour, my glycogen levels are low and then I have to re-eat, refeed. How do I do this? So there are many scenarios thinkable of for people, and I describe them in my book as well, for who should and who could start with their intermittent fasting journey. I'm not sure whether this sufficiently answers your question, Kaylin, but for now, let me continue also with Derek's question, because it's been shown that, so to start with, intermittent fasting is not a diet. The advantage of intermittent fasting is that there's only one rule that counts, and that's the rule of meal timing, because we're talking about when to eat and when to stop eating. That's the only rule. And what you eat within what we call the feeding window, you're relatively free to decide yourself what you want to eat within the feeding window. Intermittent fasting fits many eating styles, as I say it. You can combine it with a low carb diet, which is very popular, or with a ketogenic diet even. But you can also combine it with a vegetarian or even vegan diet if you like. You can combine it with a classical, I'm from the Netherlands, so with a classical Dutch or classical South African, that's my other half, with a classical South African diet, that's possible. You're not interventing on what you eat, but when you eat. Now, the advantage of intermittent fasting compared to, for instance, a classical low energy intake diet is that you can keep your energy intake high, which is also required for maintaining muscle mass, isn't it? I mean, the bodybuilders amongst us know that you need a sufficient amount of energy, or if you want to talk in terms of nutrients, proteins, maybe even carbohydrates and fats to maintain muscle mass. The classical energy restriction diet says that you have to eat 1,200 kilocalories or even 500 kilocalories to lose body fat or to lose weight. But what we know from those diets is, even though if you continue your fitness regimen, even though if you continue your workouts, that for every kilo that you drop 2/3 fat and 1/3 of lean muscle mass. And that's obviously something that we all don't want, because the lean muscle mass is a predictor for health. The lean muscle mass on top is the main engine that is responsible for your metabolism. In fact, we should all strive for having a bigger engine, because a bigger engine utilizes more fuel. Even when running stationary, when sitting stationary, when doing this, if you have a bigger engine, then you utilize more energy. So the advantage of intermittent fasting compared to such classical diet is that it's very well capable, especially when you combine it with strength training, fitness, bodybuilding, body movement type of strength training, in which you use gravity also, is that you are very well capable of maintaining muscle mass while dropping your body fat. Because due to the timing, you will deplete your glycogen first after 10 to 12 hours. Then your fat metabolism will increase as a compensatory mechanism, which means that you also start burning body fats for fuel. As I said, I've worked with Badr Hari who is a former heavyweight champion in kickboxing. We Europeans are fond of kickboxing, especially the Dutch. And you can look up pictures if you go to Google and you Google it, Badr Hari, muscle mass. You can see that, especially last year, you can find lots of pictures of this guy without clothing. He also posed for the Men's Health, and he is fit as fuck, has huge muscles, and he's shredded. And we achieved this partly due to due to a certain intermittent fasting regimen.
Awesome. That's really great in order to be able to hit on. One of the other things that I want to do at this point is kind of change gears a little bit, and rather than kind of continuing down this path and talking about the specifics, maybe taking a macro view and seeing how the industry looks, what the business of this looks like, how this is going to impact a lot of our audience members who are joining us today as well. So from my perspective and what I've seen, and also what I've gathered from your introduction, it was for me, it was super interesting to see how this is something that has presented itself even from the early days of our hunter-gatherer phases, and how the body was adapted in order to be able to survive during those times. However, now it feels as though it's in the industry, it's a bit different. In normal kind of popular culture, it feels like this is cutting edge and something new. How would you kind of explain that the industry has changed in order to kind of make this turn since you first started from studying your PhD in 2011, and how has that evolved, and what has kind of set this up for today?
Sure. This is a very difficult question. Of course, there's always the influence of industry. When I talk about industry, I talk about food industry in this case. And since the rise of nutrition science about 100 years ago, a lot of products have come up, ranging from cornflakes to sports bars that you have to eat in between meals, and so forth and so forth and so forth. The strange thing is, the more we modulated and constructed food, I always talk about food, you barely hear me speaking about nutrition, because food has so much more in it than only nutrition. But the more we looked at food from the nutrition point of view, constructing food with so much protein and this much carbohydrates and fats and so forth, the bigger we became, the fatter we became. You see, since the introduction of food science 100 years ago, we've only grew fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter. So every now and then, a person comes up with a new idea of how we should eat, and looking back, on how we've always eaten, or at least sharing thoughts with us about how this person thinks that we've always eaten. So the paleo diet is a very good example of this as well. The ketogenic diet has actually, there is a lot of overlap with the ketogenic diet and the paleo diet, but the ketogenic diet in the early 2000s, I think, set a new trend towards a new way of how to look at food, and discarding a lot of processed foods, refined sugars, and so forth. And that didn't go without resistance, obviously, because there is a huge, market for these products. The light product market, in which fats have been reduced at the cost of sugars, because sugars were perceived as a good thing and fats as a bad thing, which came from an observation by Ansel Keys in the 50s, who found that a lot of managers in the United States died from cardiovascular disease. And he also saw that these same people ate lots of fats. Saturated fats is what he said. Looking back at those studies, is that we can tell that these people didn't only eat lots of fats, but they also ate lots of carbs and processed foods, because the 50s were, gave rise to the uh, to a market growth of processed foods. McDonald's came and stuff. So critically looking back, that might have been a misinterpretation, and eventually a renewed interest for the Banting diet or the low carb diet arose in the early 2000s via the paleo diet. Then there was a revival of the ketogenic diet, which has actually been an invention from the 1920s or something, back in those days, against epilepsy. Didn't have anything to do with losing fat. It was an invention that was invented for epilepsy, and there was a side effect that people on the ketogenic diet also drop body fat. So revival of the ketogenic diet, and then intermittent fasting came in, and I think there was a program somewhere around 2010, 2011 or something like that, maybe 2009, 2008, which was called Lean Gains. And Lean Gains was a program that was specifically targeted at fitness people who wanted to shred, who want to become more shredded, who wanted to, melt their body fat away. And Lean Gains was the prototype of the 16-8 protocol of intermittent fasting. And via the fitness industry, and this is what you oftentimes see, is that via the population, via the normal people, eventually interest from the scientific world increased to intermittent fasting. I still remember in 2012, I wanted to do a study to intermittent fasting. I was still working at university. And my professor said, we're not going to do this because this is nonsense. It's not going to work. It's against everything that we've learned. And we, a pure scientist should always be humble and know that even though we think we know a lot, we don't know SHIT. But back then it was too early. And now, almost 10 years later, you see so many studies being published in humans, fortunately, about intermittent fasting. So what most of the time happens is that there is this societal shift that evokes a certain urge to go deeper into, initially from the notion that we have to debunk this, and then sometimes it happens the other way around, and very nice things can come out. This happened with intermittent fasting, but also with the whole plant forward movement. This is also a societal driven thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, and one of the things that we typically do is we have a segment of the show that's called the Operations Deep Dive. And this is such a great chance today in order to actually spend a little bit of time diving into detail on how a individual who's listening today, whether they're an independent personal trainer or whether they're a studio owner and gym, and they're trying to think about how to incorporate nutrition as part of their business model, and what's an effective way in order to do that. In the U.S., there's restrictions on it. Of course, you have to be a nutritionist in order to be able to assign meal plans and that. So there is some red tape. In your opinion, though, how would you kind of lay out a great way in order for a business owner or an independent trainer in order to be able to offer the other side of the coin to healthiness, fitness, and well-being, and incorporating the nutrition component in addition to maybe just the physical training that they're doing?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's a very good thing that this, nutritionist thing and helping others with nutrition advice is a restricted thing that you have to be certified for, as it happens in the US. Here, it's a little bit different. You don't necessarily have to be certified, and I don't really think that that's a good thing. So, thumbs up for that. On the other hand, I did a little bit of a research and I found that you can already do a course of 12 weeks, to be a certified nutrition instructor whatsoever. You can ask yourself, if you follow a personal training course that takes a year, that goes, into deep, what would be the value of a nutrition course that only takes you 12 weeks? Because the digestive tract, nutrient absorption, and everything that happens here is at least as complex as the anatomy of your muscles and your body in terms of exercise and physiology. That on that side. Um, my recommendation would be, what I often see is that people want to do too much. They want to be the personal trainer, the great personal trainer, which most of them are, but then they undermine who they are by also helping others with, giving nutrition advice. And then you have the risk that you become this average trainer guy, because yeah, he gives great personal training sessions, but yeah, his nutrition advice is a little bit so. He doesn't always know what he's talking about. So you should always ask yourself, what do you want? What do you want to excel in? And in order to excel, you have to stay close to who you are, what your passion is, and what you're good at. You can't be good at everything. I make this mistake myself. You'd rather look for collaborations with strong parties who could, who could supplement your trainings with their amazing nutrition plans, because they might be specialized in many different cases, ranging from obesity. And even if, when we're talking about obesity, we have a population who has never tried to lose weight at all, and there is this population who did tens or dozens of attempts to lose weight. They even require a different approach, both suffering from obesity or a fat percentage which is too high, but different approaches. So a specialized nutritionist could supplement the trainers in a much better way, because this party also has the time to go into the deep, and doesn't typically, if they're doing it correct, apply a one size fits all approach. As with the trainer, I mean, a good trainer would, in my expectations, look at what are we talking about, what is its morphology, who are you talking about, what are his or her wishes, goals, and so forth, and tailors the program to the desires and the demands of the subject. And that's what a good nutritionist also does. We are working with elite athletes. There's two sides of this story. An elite athlete would never take the risk to let the trainer and the nutritionist be the same person. An elite athlete would always look for the best nutritionist and for the best strength and conditioning trainer, for instance, the best sprinting training, the best kickboxing trainer, the best football trainer, and would create, as we say it, trias politica, with 3 or 2 parties to get the best out of this individual. And I think that's also important for personal trainers, but also for fitness institutions. Please put aside the ego, because you can't be everyone. Try to excel in what you're good at and look for strong partnerships. Strong partnerships that could eventually supplement, so that you can supplement each other.
Yeah, that's excellent advice, and I think that in many organizations you'll see that they'll bring on nutritionists as well into the business in order to be able to help with that component. Um, one thing that I'm curious because I think the gyms maybe in the States could be a little bit different from some of the facilities that I've seen in the Netherlands, where in athletic clubs you'll have 5 to 10,000 people who can be members, and maybe there's a couple of nutritionists on staff who are also working with the team of trainers. Um, I always think of nutrition as something that's incredibly specific and very delicate and needs to be customized person by person, based off of their sensitivities, allergies, dietary restrictions, etc., and their goals, of course. How can an organization incorporate nutrition if they already have a nutritionist on staff at scale in a way that's profitable but accessible for members who maybe don't have the resources in order to say, hey, I'm going to have the best personal trainer, the best nutritionist, and somebody for another discipline as well.
Yeah, fair point. And I mean, I see this comment by Audra here. It's absolutely a fair argument that if you want to achieve a healthy lifestyle, it should always be a combination of not only nutrition or only fitness, but a combination of those and even more. But having said that, scalability for the entrepreneurs is always a challenge, and for most people, also here, um, the the most luxurious thing they could afford themselves to invest in their own health would be their gym membership. So if there is another cost that comes on top for instance, a personal trainer or a nutritionist, then it can get very expensive. So looking for semi-personalized approaches, maybe even digital approaches, in which you can target specific populations based on algorithms. So there's I see huge potential for new technology based on algorithms. That could be a very interesting solution, and doesn't even have to be too difficult, because you could start with asking a very simple question: what is your goal? You want to lose weight, or you want to become you want to gain muscle mass, or even you want to become fitter, or just live a healthy lifestyle? Three. Then the weight loss group you can divide in experienced weight loss client, have no experience at all. When you talk about the experienced people, you know that there is a specific, from a nutrition point of view, there is a specific pattern, a recurring pattern that requires a different approach that someone who's never lost a kilo and never attempt to lose a kilo at all. Also, when you look at the muscle group, the group who wants to build muscle, um, is there any competition element involved, for instance, like bodybuilding, or is it more for personal reasons, or do you want to become a little bit more fitter on the pitch? So you can, based on discriminating groups, and you could easily start with, for instance, 5 groups. You could develop an approach that would help up to 70, maybe even up to 80% of the people in their initial get to know your right food pattern stage. That requires some development time, absolutely. But be aware that there are also parties who can do this with and for you. Myself, for instance, we collaborate also with Virtual Gym, but also with some local parties who have 200 up to 500 employees. They came in with the same question, and then this is just how you target it. You can't, I can't help 500 individuals with a personalized nutrition plan. That takes too much time for me, and it's way too expensive for the company. So if you can come up with a clever solution, um, and making use of the digital world and all the applications that we have, that could be a very interesting first step. Now, once the subject gets the feeling of, this is what I like, this is what I want, I'm curious, do you have any nutritionists that you work with? Then you could, send him or her to the nutritionist for a personalized program.
Yeah, and I sorry, go ahead, doctor.
Yeah, I mean, it takes, especially in the development stage, that takes time. But once you get there, you can all of a sudden you can serve way more clients for a lower price, for a fair price, an affordable price. And again, I repeat myself, but fitness entrepreneurs, personal trainers, do what you're good at. You're good at working with people. You're good at uh, training people and providing training facilities. Collaborate with other parties who have the other expertise.
No, excellent. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think, at least from conversations I've been having with, personal trainers, corporate providers, corporate fitness, basically all across the industry, people are starting to go into this route of a more holistic wellness. So it's really good to hear everyone that we speak to driving home a consistent point of view. And I actually want to look a little bit at the future. I know that obviously we don't have a crystal ball, we can't define it, but if anyone could give us a pretty good opinion, it's an expert. So I'd like to get your kind of your expert advice. And you talked a little bit about the food industry, but how do you think this could also impact maybe like the healthcare industry, for instance? Having these programs be assigned by doctors, et cetera, and becoming part of that ecosystem, just making it more and more holistic.
Yeah, that glass bowl would make it a little bit easier to say anything good about this. I mean, wearable devices are they're of course very trending and very popular amongst, especially amongst people who are into this whole fitness and health thing. I wear my own. There's a new one by these guys who also has an oxygen saturation meter in it that provides so much data. I use it for myself. Sometimes if my clients have it, I implement that in our coaching or in our online coaching programs. And I know that also when we're talking about healthcare and insurance companies, I know that they're also after those data. The question is whether you want that. Personally, I think that's not a thing that I would be very keen on sharing with insurance companies, because they could also use it against you. But I think wearable devices are very interesting tools for monitoring and also for predicting based on sleep patterns. For instance, what's the average sleep pattern? How has it changed? What does that with your performance? What does that? Is there even a predictive value that we can link to disease? With coronavirus, for instance, how does that relate to heart rate, oxygen saturation, sleep, and so forth? Can we, from all these data, move into predictive values via which we can also reduce the burden on the healthcare system, moving towards prevention instead of curation only? Curation happens when it's too late, and we all know what happens when it's too late. We could clearly see that during these months and still. So I think wearable devices could be very interesting. Yeah, biometrics as mentioned here. Yeah, that's in my opinion a major thing that we should keep an eye on. However, confidentiality in terms of what data do you want to share, what data you don't want to share. That's a very big issue in my opinion. It's so sensitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would completely agree, and I think, at least for me, I just started hearing about intermittent fasting for the first time maybe like 2 years ago, and I think we have something called Google and the internet where there's a wealth of knowledge out there. Some of it good, some of it not so good. I know that there's people out here that certainly have their opinions on the internet, etc. Not everyone has the privilege of being able to speak to an expert like you. So is there anything that you've seen out there related to intermittent fasting that maybe others have put out there on the web that you would maybe warn people to stay away from? Maybe it's some kind of combination or a specific aspect of it.
Sure, that's difficult, but there is eventually there is no shortcut to success whatsoever. So always be very cautious if people start promising stuff. I'd run away if people start promising stuff. I just run away because they obviously also don't have this glass ball. So stay away from those people. You should be cautious for such things, promising this and that, and in 30 days, blah blah blah. We all know the drill, stay away from those, because eventually a healthy lifestyle, developing a healthy lifestyle, developing a healthy body, mind is a lifelong journey. Means investing day in, day out, a lifelong. There are no shortcuts, and sometimes you could maybe speed certain things up a little bit, but eventually it requires attention. It requires attention, time, everything you spend time in, and everything that you put, focus on, that will eventually grow every day, um, a lifelong. Yeah.
No, excellent. I completely agree with that. And I'm just thinking about some of like YouTube advertisements I've seen lately in different parts of life, promising kind of these quick results,
Run
easy,
away.
cheap, exactly. So there were several more questions, but Kaylin, I know we did also want to get to some audience questions where I think we had more come in, and then I know you also had some other topics, so I don't want to take up all of Dr. Ludidi's time. So I guess I'll pass it back over to you.
Yeah, perfect. Let's go ahead and jump into some of the audience questions that we haven't had a chance in order to address yet. So, some of the things that came up, you alluded a bit to it earlier, but there was some specifics about is when it's applicable. So one thing that one question that I want to ask is this one here is very specific to, maybe towards a target group of the audience within this person's facility and the demographic of their customer, or maybe personally. What's the best time for fasting for women over 50 to lose weight?
The best time, so 50 or 60 or 55 years old, or
I
the best
inter
time. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So as I always say, one size fits none, and it's very important to learn to listen to your body. We find this very difficult because we want to measure everything, we want to quantify everything, and we think that by quantifying and measuring our bodies, our food, that we can control it. But you can't, because you can't control life in the end. Yes. And the strange thing is that since we started quantifying, measuring, and so forth, it didn't make us any healthier. So back in the days when we were still living as hunter gatherers, and I know it's 2020, we're not there. I'm sitting behind my computer with my earbuds in. Times have changed, but back then we couldn't count calories. We couldn't even, count proteins, fats, carbohydrates, and so forth. It doesn't make sense. We just ate until we were full, and then we got hungry again. We ate until we were full, and once more. And then at the end of the day, we went to bed. We woke in the morning when the sun would rise, and then we ate until were full, and so forth. We are totally dysregulated. Modern man is totally dysregulated. So the first step would be try to learn to listen to your body. Your body gives so many signals, and fullness, satiety is one of those signals. When you're sitting behind the television, for instance, and you're eating like this, watching the news or the elections, you keep eating because you're focusing on what's happening over there. You don't listen to your body. You don't even give your body the chance to listen to it. Listen to your body first. One size fits none. So what for this person works might not work for the other one. In general, we see that as for women, they go better with shorter fasts, 14 hours, I would say, up to 16 hours. Men are a little bit, you can push them a little bit further, 16 hours, 18 hours, 20 hours. It has to do with a different hormonal pattern. Women and men, we are eventually biologically not equal. And you have to take that into account. But I can tell this person how long to fast, but I always start with a very mild version. So, for instance, if you want to stick to the 16-8 variant of intermittent fasting, which means that you fast for 16 hours and you have an eating window of 8 hours, which is the most common version. I would say if you normally have your breakfast at 7 in the morning and have your last meal at 9 in the evening, your last snack, I would now say that stop eating at 8 in the evening, and instead of 7 o'clock, have your first meal at 8. Do that for 2 days, and then you move over to 9 o'clock, to 10 o'clock. And that's where you might want to stay for a while, see how it goes. And after 2 weeks, you might, extend it even further to 12 o'clock. Then you're fasting for 16 hours. You'll be fasting for 16 hours. Once you notice that it doesn't feel right, and I have clients who say that they start shivering towards, 12 o'clock, which means that their metabolism has dropped. Some clients even had, their hair fall out, or they got a dry, rashy skin. That means that something is not right. Don't stick to this extreme 16 hours because you think it's healthy. Because when this happens, it's not healthy. Something is wrong. Reduce the fast or even quit the fast, and from there on, continue. Never forget what your personal reason is to fast. No one has to fast. You don't have to fast, right? Which brings me actually to a common mistake. I'm not sure whether I'm taking away some questions, but the biggest mistake that people make is that instead of starting with their fasting journey, they're starting with a journey that we call energy intake reduction journey. So instead of fasting, instead of taking into account the meal timing only, they all of a sudden they start eating less and less and less and less, ending up with maybe 6, 7, 800 kilocalories per day. On top, fasting for 16 hours. What are you doing? We're fasting. We're not starving, we're fasting, which means that within the feeding window, you should eat the same amount of food that you normally eat on a whole day. And that's the thing. If you just jump into it, I heard about this intermittent fasting. Yeah, you eat in 8 hours and you fast for 16 hours. You jump into it, you don't even know why you do it. You just do it because everyone does it. You're not prepared, and then check your clock. Oh, it's 1 o'clock already. I need to eat now. You grab yourself an apple, and then 3 o'clock. Let's have another apple, or maybe a candy bar, whatsoever, or a protein bar. And then in the evening, yeah, I'm fasting. I'm working on my health, so I should avoid carbs. Let's have some dried chicken breast and some broccoli. That's it. 600 kilocalories on a day. come on, what are you doing? You're ruining yourself. Fasting is not about suffering. It's about, celebrating your meals also, because life eventually should, I mean, I always say enjoy health, and food should be delicious and nutritious. It shouldn't be suffering. I had clients, American clients, and they said, "What are you doing?" I said, "What am I doing? Yeah, you give me all this nice food. I should be suffering. I'm on a diet." Yeah, he really made me laugh. But eating should be delicious and nutritious, not only nutritious and very little and suffering.
Yeah, great tips in there as well. Yeah, definitely another excellent point as well about the making sure to consume the same amount of calories during the eating window. So some of the other questions that came through as you were going through the program today was a lot of questions about how intermittent fasting can potentially help certain diseases or osteoarthritis and that. Can you see it on your end as well within the question and answer section where there were some questions in there about what other positive effects intermittent
Mhm.
fasting can have. So there was questions about, does it help with inflammation and pain related to osteoarthritis and fibromyalgia? Questions on does it help with Crohn's disease, another reducing inflammation, and there's a couple more within there as well. I know you already hit on some of the benefits and some of the areas that it can treat, but are based off of what you're seeing and any others, is there any other areas that this can help in
Yeah. So
relieving medical?
yeah, thanks, Kaylin. So at this moment, we are investigating a dozen of other applications of intermittent fasting. For instance, irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel diseases like Crohn's disease, other inflammatory diseases, cancer even. Um, one should remember that there is no quick fix to anything. Yeah. So, having said that, and it sounds a little bit contradictory, but the basis of a successful fasting journey should always be a good eating pattern. So, if your eating pattern sucks, then your fasting journey won't get you any further. So, in my book, I also talk about the first step is learn how to eat well, and you should find a eating pattern, an eating style that matches your requirements in terms of what is nutritious for you, what is delicious for you, and I even dive deeper into this delicious part with a certain theory. Having said that, there is a lot of investigation going on inflammatory diseases, cancer, IBS, Crohn's disease, and more. It's very difficult to clearly state anything about that. I featured a television program in the Netherlands about intermittent fasting and cancer as well. And Walter Longo, who is an Italian professor, he's doing cancer research um, on intermittent via intermittent fasting. I write about that in my book as well. Here in the Netherlands, we're doing some breast cancer research, and what we see is that women with breast cancer undergoing chemotherapy, the women who do intermittent fasting plus chemotherapy, they do better than the chemotherapy only, because it's proposed that fasting, like a ketogenic diet, that cancer cells, they don't like the ketogenic state. And with fasting, you provoke a ketogenic state because you deplete all the body sugars, and cancer cells, they love sugars and they can't cope with fats and ketones. So if you deplete the sugars, via fasting, for instance, prolonged fasting, and on top you put chemotherapy, that might be beneficial for disease outcome. So what we now, the preliminary results show that fasting plus chemo might do better compared to chemo only. I'm very cautious um, um, stating anything very, clearly about this, because it's a very delicate field that we're talking about. So there's much more research going on these days about many different fields of application in combination with intermittent fasting. We can't really, with very much certainty, state anything about that other than the previous mentioned things like obesity, type 2 diabetes, improvement of cardiovascular disease, brain function, sports enhancement, metabolic flexibility, and the preliminary results on Alzheimer's disease, autophagy, and even perhaps cancer. As I said in my book, I elaborate on these topics as well. Yeah, so there are more fields of application. Absolutely.
Oh, that's great. And another question that came through. I just want to make sure that we can get to as many of the audience questions as we
Yeah.
can. So sorry for jumping a bit, but one question that came through was, what's your thoughts on periodic extended fasts, such as 72 hours plus, maybe for like a water fast?
Yeah, water fast means that you just drink water, nothing else. So you can also, that's actually the most strict form of intermittent fasting. There is another fast which we call the dry fast, and what you do with intermittent fasting, you strict energy intake. So you're allowed to drink water, black coffee with no sugar, no milk, black tea with no sugar, no milk. That's in fact it. A water fast, you only drink water and you don't eat. And there is also a dry fast in which you even don't drink. That's what Muslims do during their holy month Ramadan. Prolonged fasting, that is fasting longer than 24 hours, is said to stimulate autophagy. So if you want to get that regenerative capacity of your cells, that cleaning up capacity of your cells, then you have to fast longer than 24 hours. Would be good to do it so now and then, every 2 months, for instance. Myself, I do a 24 up to 48-hour fast every month. The first weekend of every new month, I call it the equilibrium fast. You can follow that also on Instagram. I post about it. And there are many people joining me. I write about it in the book also about the benefits, but it has to do with autophagy and cleaning up your cells. A single prolonged fast doesn't do anything. I mean, it will not benefit you in the long run. And also be aware that if you, for instance, do too much of fasting, too much of a good thing could be a bad thing as well. Too much water, you can't drink 8 liters of water per day every day, because that might be toxic. So too much of a good thing could be a bad thing. And as for fasting, eventually fasting on itself is a stressor. Your body perceives it as a stressor, and that stressor will evoke certain mechanisms, biological evolutionary mechanisms, that will benefit your health. But if you apply that stressor for too long, that might work against you. If you fast too extreme, too long, too much stress can be a bad thing as well. Incidental stress can sharpen your mind. For instance, I'm nervous for a presentation whatsoever, boom, I'm super sharp. Incidental stress. But continuous stress, chronic stress, can be harmful, that you will suffer from high blood pressure and so forth and so forth. The same with fasting. So for that reason, my recommendation, on top of your question of the 72-hour fast, which is a good thing if you do it incidentally once every 2 or 3 months for autophagy. If you do intermittent fasting, do it for 6 to 8 weeks, and then have a break. And then 3 months later, you do it for another cycle of 6 to 8 weeks. In this way, you make use of the biological rhythm I mean, back in the days, we were not continuously suffering from food scarcity. And remember that these are the mechanisms, the increased fat metabolism and so forth, metabolic flexibility. These are the mechanisms that we are activating. But try to go back to normal every 2 months, because if you look at people living in nature, they eat 3 meals per day, morning, midday, and evening. That's the normal situation. No excesses, just modest a modest food intake, and a highly active lifestyle. That's actually the situation that we all want to go to. Not possible for environmental reasons, but that's the situation you want to go to. And with fasting, you can, apply that recurring reset, as it were.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that. And then last question I think we have here from the audience that we'll be able to get to is there a kind of food that you recommend to break the fasting period? Or is it okay to just simply eat whatever's within your daily routine of eating? Or others like a...
Depends. Yeah, it depends on how sensitive your stomach is and how used to fasting and breaking the fast you are. One size fits none. You could do it with a bulk of water, or salt water, even, if you like. Myself, I like to have a nice broth, especially after the longer fasts, after 24, 48 hours of fasting. I'd rather have a broth, and then I start with a small meal, and an hour later I take a larger meal. Can be a little bit too heavy for some people if they right away, bulk a big meal. So a broth, a cup of tea, some salt water to start with, and then maybe a smoothie, 250 milliliters smoothie or something like that. It's just a small smoothie or shake that will do the work, especially when you're just starting your fasting journey. If I do the 16-8 protocol, I can have a large meal, a large warm meal after 16 hours of fasting, which is relatively a short period of fasting. So I would go for a liquid or a semi-liquid meal. That would be the best to start with in the beginning. And talking about water, handling hydration during the fast, you can just drink water throughout the day. I'm not a fan of a continuous drinking schedule in which you drink every hour, half a liter, but I'm more a protagonist of bulk drinking, which means drink until you're full, and then once you get thirsty again, you drink until you're full, and so forth. But during the fast, you can drink water, black coffee, as I said, or tea for hydration purposes.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Ludidi, for taking the time in order to chat with us today. There was a lot of audience questions, and so we didn't have the time in order to be able to hit all of the questions that we had on our end. But I think it's much better in order to hit the audience questions, as they're the ones who are going to be using this information and applying it to their businesses. Thanks everybody so much for taking the opportunity to join us as well. As mentioned earlier, everybody who's participated within sending some questions over, we're going to make sure to reach out to those people who have the 5 people who have won the challenge, and then we'll be sending you guys your copy of Dr. Ludidi's book. So thanks again for that, Dr. Ludidi. And yeah, with that being said, thank you for taking the time in order to be able to meet with us today and sharing a bit of your wisdom.
Always welcome. And since there are so many questions still coming in, I'd say that if you go to my website, you can also download, there is a free ebook, The Basics of Intermittent Fasting. It's 60 plus pages, a lot of information there. If you like, go there, check my website, drludidi.com, and get your copy. Thanks everyone for all these questions. Pleasure talking to you. And yeah, I hope to see you again, guys.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.